Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for taking out time and joining me in today's session. My name is Roshan, and I'll be the presenter for today's session. Before I get started with today's session, I just want to know if you are able to hear me clearly. I would appreciate if you could participate in the Zoom poll and let me know if you're able to hear the presenter clearly. Throughout the session, there will be multiple polls. I would appreciate if everybody can participate in the poll and give your feedback. Okay, I see everybody is able to hear me clearly. That's good. So before we get into the nitty-gritty details of the session, a quick introduction about myself. My name is Roshan. I work with Ingram Micro Australia as a solution architect. I'm based in Melbourne. I've been working on Microsoft technology pretty much my entire career. I started with SharePoint, then moved to BPOS or Office 365, did several migrations of file server to SharePoint Online, SharePoint on-prem to SharePoint Online, Exchange servers, Gmail, and other third-party email servers to Office 365 and Microsoft 365. Have worked on workflow automation solutions like Nintex and K2, which later got acquired by Nintex. I've been working on Azure since its beginning, when it was known as Windows Azure. I started with SQL Server and virtual machines, and have been helping partners design and develop solutions around Microsoft Azure ever since then. I have worked for Microsoft for about 5 years as a partner technical consultant. I've worked with several gold certified partners in multiple regions, and currently I'm working with Ingram Micro, which is a value added distributor. So I've understood the channel market very well. What are the pain points of a partner? How can a distributor like Ingram Micro help them? And today is one of our value added offering where we are helping you gain more knowledge on Azure, help you sell more Azure, and make a lot of revenue out of it. Now, before going into the upcoming slides, I wanted to understand the audience in terms of their Azure knowledge. So, do you currently sell Microsoft Azure or provide services on Microsoft Azure? So, wanted to know if you have been selling a lot of Azure? Do you have a lot of customers? Just wanted to gauge the audience so that I can tweak the slides and the session and the content around it. Okay, so thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for participating in the poll. I see there is almost 50% of the people who have not yet started selling Azure. There are another good 40% who have sold Azure to few of their customers. So this session is definitely going to help you gain a deeper understanding of Azure, and also give you a lot of ideas into how you can sell Azure to your customers. This session is definitely designed for partners who are beginning their journey into Microsoft Azure, evaluating which scenario, which customer is suitable for Azure, and how he can use the various services which are part of Azure to go ahead and either migrate the customer or integrate Azure with their existing infrastructure. Before I move on to the next slide, one last question for you all. Just want to understand your role in your current organization. Are you a support engineer? Are you a decision maker? Are you from sales? Are you pre-sales? So just want to understand your current role in the company. Okay, thank you again for participating in the poll. I see we have a good mix of people here. We have pre-sales engineers, support engineers, business development managers as well, and decision makers. So this session is definitely technical oriented, technical pre-sales oriented. It definitely doesn't have a lot of content around sales or statistics, and definitely not a lot of content around marketing as well. Okay, so let's quickly look at the agenda. We'll quickly go through the cloud service models. I'm sure you would have seen it a million times now, but we'll quickly run through that for people who are fairly new to cloud. We look at what are the advantages of infrastructure as a service. So in the cloud service model, there are different models. And today in this session, we'll be concentrating on the infrastructure as a service component of the cloud service. And then we'll look at how infrastructure as a service model fits within Azure, or what's the Azure offering around infrastructure as a service, what are the core components, and then we'll get into how do you identify these opportunities, right? So what questions should you ask to your customers so that you can get to know about their environment, which also translates into opportunities for Microsoft Azure. So how you can upsell and cross-sell to your existing customers. Before we end the session, I've also put up some of the simple scenarios that I receive on a daily basis, just so that you understand what's the price point like for certain size of customers. Now, like these pricing and scenarios are generic and indicative pricing. We can definitely have a call after the session to discuss your particular customer requirement and see how we can move him to cloud. So cloud service models, like I said, this is a slide that's become popular ever since cloud was introduced to the IT world. We have traditional on-premise infrastructure where we have been deploying the applications either on VMware, Hyper-V, physical, other virtualization technology where the customer manages and maintains the server, storage, networking, data, application, everything everything that's invested in IT. So you have to manage right from the networking all the way up to data and applications. When it comes to cloud, there are three models. I would say three basic models. Now there are more models coming up where you have something called function as a service, containers as a service. But today we'll stick to the three other basic models, which is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So software as a service, the classic example is Microsoft 365, Salesforce, Dropbox, Gmail, Hotmail. All these are software as a service where you don't have to manage and maintain any infrastructure, any system updates, any application update. You don't have to manage any of them. All you need is a user ID and password to log in. If it's a paid service, pay for the service and start using it. Right? It is as simple as creating a user account and starting and start using the service. Platform as a service gives you, I would say, a little more control in terms of what are the things you can customize. One of the classic examples of platform as a service is web hosting. For example, GoDaddy. Right? So GoDaddy provides you web hosting where you don't need to worry whether GoDaddy is using IIS, Apache, or any other servers, or even the number of servers. All you worry is, will it support my programming language? Or does it have enough space to store my data? And is the system secure enough? Right. So in platform as a service, you don't really worry about what operating system, what hardware, what runtime application, runtime software it's using. All you worry is whether you can run your application and whether it is able to store your application data. So database as a service is also another classic example where you don't really worry whether the database is running on a physical server, a virtual server, whether it is using 15 servers or 2 servers. All you worry is whether you're able to access the database, whether you're able to connect to the database, store the database, store in the database, create tables, run queries on that particular database on the table. So those are examples of platform as a service. When it comes to infrastructure as a service, you get control from the operating system level, which means you can define what operating system you would like to install. It can be Windows, it can be Linux, it can be Windows Server, it can be Windows 10. So you can choose what operating system you want. Then you can define what's the middleware, what's the runtime, what data, what application. So once you have control of the operating system, you can install any software that is supported on that operating system, or that can be installed and configured on that operating system. You can define where uh, the application will store its data, how will the application be accessed by users. So you have all these controls under you in infrastructure as a service. But what are the things that you don't need to worry is you don't have to worry about the virtualization. You don't need to worry whether it is Hyper-V, it's VMware, it's physical. You need to worry about the server uptime. You don't have to worry about the physical server and storage maintenance, the networking infrastructure. So all the background work of making sure your infrastructure is always up and running is taken care by the cloud provider. All you worry is which operating system do I need, how much space do I need, how do I install the application, how will people access it, how will I store the data of my application. So that's what you decide and start using. So in today's session, we'll be focusing around infrastructure as a service. So if you compare infrastructure as a service with on-prem data center, there are several advantages. Right? So these are some of the bullet points that I've put in here. For example, hardware. If it's an on-prem, you typically have to renew your hardware every 3 to 5 years. And today, even the hardware vendors have been um, coming out with uh, advancement in the hardware technology quite quickly, right? So 3 4 years before the hardware which you had bought and the latest technologies that are available today may not work on that old hardware. Even the hardware vendors have been improving their technology, and you need to have people who are constantly also have the knowledge in order to implement and support that hardware. Support is another cost when it comes to on-prem. You need to make sure you have your maintenance contracts with the vendor. You are within the warranty period. If you want to use the hardware after the warranty, you need to have an additional cost. You need to make sure you buy enough hardware so that you're able to cater to the growth of your infrastructure or of your company. So these are all capex oriented expenses that are typically seen in an on-premise data center. Scalability, I mean, if you want to add more servers, you will have to place an order, wait typically a week or two for the servers to be shipped. Then you schedule a maintenance job. Sometimes this maintenance jobs can impact other servers. You go ahead, add additional servers, configure them, and then make it available. So by the time you have your additional servers added to your on-prem, it typically takes 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks for it to even be available to your end users to start using it. So these are some of the disadvantages with on-prem infrastructure when you compare it with cloud-based infrastructure as a service. Now let's jump into specifics about Azure. So I'm sure most of you know Azure. Azure is one of the most popular cloud platforms in the market. It competes with Google and AWS. It has the highest number of regions when you compare with any other cloud provider. It has, I think, a little over 60 regions. Microsoft keeps adding regions every month. Uh, they have already announced that New Zealand, our closest neighbor, is getting their own data center. Indonesia is getting their own data center. There are a couple of additional data centers coming in Europe and US. So they keep adding more and more data centers, and these data centers, or these regions, not data centers, these regions can have additional multiple data centers in them. For example, within Australia, there are 4 regions. There is Australia East, there's Australia Southeast, and there's Australia Central and Central 2. Now, each of this region can have multiple data centers. So Australia East can have 3 data centers, Australia Southeast can have 2 data centers, Australia Central can have 2 and 2 data centers in the each location. So Microsoft keeps adding these regions, and it's very important to know this because you will have customers who are geographically distributed. So when you deploy a solution or when you move their on-prem solution to Azure solution, you want to make sure that you have a region closest to where their end users are located, so that you reduce the latency for these end users to access their application as less as possible. Now, talking about the various services, this is again a very high level idea about the various services. There are definitely a lot of services missing in this chart. I could only crunch so many services within a single slide. But like you see, you have infrastructure as service, you have hybrid cloud where you can actually integrate your on-premise infrastructure with cloud. A lot of customers have legacy applications, old applications, or even applications which are very, very business critical, and they would like to still run that infrastructure on-prem for some more time and define a strategy for it to move to cloud, whereas non-critical applications, they are willing to move to cloud. So this is where you set up a hybrid scenario where you still have on-prem systems running, on-prem servers running, and at the same time you have cloud running. So Microsoft Azure has a very strong hybrid cloud, I would say, portfolio, which can integrate very well with your on-premise infrastructure. We will be touching about how you integrate it, how you integrate both on-prem and Azure in the upcoming slides. So just to highlight some of the components that are involved in infrastructure as service, we have compute, storage, networking, we have hybrid cloud, we have additional compute services like virtual machine scale set, Windows Virtual Desktop, we have batch services, container services, and all these things definitely require a lot of security around it as well. So Azure definitely has one of the biggest security portfolio, right from monitoring to endpoint security to SIM solution to network detection, firewall solution. So it has security solutions across all the layers, which you can use within your infrastructure to protect your customers' data. So jumping into the core components of infrastructure as service, which is compute, storage, and networking. So these 3 components make up I would say the 3 most important services used by a lot of customers. Before I proceed further, I just wanted everybody to know that if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A and post your questions. I will be reviewing the questions throughout the session and hopefully answering them as we go on. So like any other infrastructure building exercise, if you're building an on-prem infrastructure as well, you always start with networking. The same holds true with Azure as well. Even within Azure, you start building your IT infrastructure by deploying a virtual network. Now, this virtual network can have multiple subnets within it. You can have multiple virtual networks as well. So you can use private IPs within this virtual network. If you do create services which require public IPs, that can also be created. But you start by creating a virtual network to begin with. Now, this virtual network can have internet-facing access. So this virtual network can be exposed to the internet, and users from the internet can access this network and components as which are part of this network. The other popular way of customers using it is setting up some kind of a site-to-site VPN. So the customer typically has an on-prem network in place where his, let's say, laptops and desktops and printers and other servers are already part of, and he wants to extend this network into Azure so that both Azure network and his on-prem network can communicate with each other. So we typically see a lot of customers implementing a site-to-site VPN. So your on-prem site is connected to Azure site. You can also implement another type of connectivity called as express route. Think of express route as a dedicated single hop connection between the customer's premise or the customer's data center and Azure data center. So there are a lot of vendors who provide express route within Australia. Telstra, Optus, these are some of the popular vendors. Even Vodafone provides express route connectivity within Australia. So working with an ISP, you can get a dedicated connection between you as an MSP or between the customer's network and Azure network, Azure data center network. So that is a very high level introduction to networking. Like I said, you probably have a little over 100 features within the Azure networking landscape. You can create user-defined route. You can create firewalls. You can even get in your own firewall. A lot of customers actually use third-party firewalls. They might be using Sophos, SonicWall, Fortinet, and they already have expertise in managing this firewall. Now, or you as an MSP, you have a preferred security vendor whose firewall you have deployed to most of your customers. Now, if that customer wants to move to Azure, and you as an MSP would like to continue to use your preferred security vendor for firewall on Azure, it is very much possible. Most of the security vendors, popular security vendors, have a virtual appliance in Azure, right? So a virtual appliance for firewall. So you can still continue to use your own vendor solution on Azure and move your customers to Microsoft Azure as well. So all those features and functionalities are very much possible within Microsoft Azure. And today in the quick demo, I'll try to highlight these components as well. The next topic in infrastructure as service is compute. Compute is nothing but the machines, the virtual machines, right? So you can have Linux-based virtual machine, Windows-based virtual machines. You can run Oracle servers, you can run SAP servers, you can run Windows servers, you can run Red Hat on Azure. So think of any latest or even if it's not latest, recent operating systems, all of those are available on Microsoft Azure. What you cannot run is, for example, if you want to run Windows 2000 or Windows 2003, these operating systems are not officially supported by Microsoft, right? And one of the best features about Azure is if you have customers who use Windows Server with software assurance in their on-premise infrastructure, and these are customers who want to move to cloud, then they can reuse their Windows Server software assurance in Azure, right? So end of the day, you still have to license the operating system which you run on Azure, right? So if you have customers who use software assurance, they can reuse that license with Azure. If you have customers who do not use software assurance, you can still purchase the Windows Server on Azure or from a distributor like Ingram Micro. Azure also provides you the concept of reserved instance, where you can go ahead and reserve a virtual machine for 1 year or 3 years. Let's say you are moving a customer to cloud, and you know that the customer will run on the cloud for the next 2 to 3 years. So you can go ahead and reserve, in a way, commit that, okay, this machine will be running 24/7 for the next 1 year or 3 years. And since you are reserving the virtual machine, Microsoft gives you up to 70% discount on the cost of running that virtual machine on Azure. So that's a huge benefit both for partner and the customer, because one, this gives a predictable cost every month, and second, it's a huge discount that you can leverage. So these are options that we can definitely help you build and tweak when you're building a code for your customer. As part of Ingram Micro Value Add Services, we can definitely help you build a code, customize it, fit your customer's requirement, and still be able to fit within his budget. The last component of infrastructure as service is Azure Storage. Azure has different types of storage available for different purposes. When you're running a virtual machine, you require a disk to be attached to the virtual machine. When you, let's say, if you are deploying an application that stores a lot of images or produces a lot of images and data, then you can also use blob storage. So blob storage is typically a type of storage for unstructured data. Then you have Azure Data Lake. This is for very big data, especially used for business. Used for data analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence. So there's a specific type of data for any kind of high performance analytics. You have Azure Files. Think of it as a file server as a service. So this is a type of storage which is accessible using an SMB protocol. So if you want 2 or 3 virtual machines to have access to a single storage, right, then you can use Azure Files. Azure Netapp Files is also similar to Azure Files, but it is powered by Netapp technology. So if you have customers who currently use Netapp on-prem, and if they are evaluating or thinking of moving to cloud, you can always use Azure Netapp Files, which can give them a very straightforward mechanism to move their on-premise Netapp storage to Azure. Right, so they can do backup of on-prem to Azure, vice versa. They can do disaster recovery. They can do migration. So Azure has Azure Netapp Files, first-party service, which is available for customers to use. The last but not the least is Azure Data Box. This is a special type of storage where if you have a customer who has, let's say, for example, 100 terabytes of data or 200 terabytes of data, and if he wants to move to cloud, migrating or uploading this data to cloud on an internet bandwidth will take a lot of time. Instead of that, you can order Azure Data Box, which is a device which Microsoft sends. The smallest size is, I think, 100 terabyte. You can upload your data into this device, ship this device back to Microsoft, and Microsoft will upload the data into the Azure Data Center. So it's an offline data transfer mechanism which Microsoft has. If you have less than 100 terabyte of data, you can always get external hard drives, encrypt it using Key Vault or Azure encryption service, and then ship that device to Microsoft. So there are different ways and means of how you can do an offline data transfer to Azure, and that storage service is called as Azure Data Box. Okay, so let's jump on to a quick demo. I'll log into Azure Portal. I'll show you the things that we just spoke about, compute, storage, networking, and how all these 3 components work with each other. If you do have any questions, feel free to use the chat window and let me know. In the meanwhile, let me quickly log into the Azure Portal. And let me reshare the screen. Okay. I hope everybody is able to see the screen sharing. If you're not, please do let me know in the chat or the Q&A. So this is the Azure Portal. Now, the way you log into Azure Portal is using this URL, portal.azure.com, right? This is one URL, or you can go to azure.microsoft.com and you can sign in from here as well. You see, you have the option saying portal. right? Now, if you are a customer or an MSP who would like to try out Azure, who would like to get a feel of Azure, create something, get some learning out of it, you can also get a free account of Azure. So Azure will give you an account which is already credited with $250, and that subscription will run for at least 30 days, right? So you can use it. I'm sorry, it is $200, not $250. It is $200 US dollars. Uh, and you can use it to create various things. You can create virtual machines, you can create services, you can create database. So all of those can be created, and you can use it for with your customers. You can use it for test and development. You can use it also as part of your learning. So I have an Azure subscription where I definitely have a lot of resources created. I use the subscription for demo and testing purposes. So let's go ahead and create a virtual machine and show you how easy and simple it is to create. And we'll also look at the concepts that we just covered. So under Azure services, as you see, I have various services here. I'll go ahead and click on virtual machine, and I'll say add virtual machine. Right now, when I say add virtual machine, this is a wizard based creation. So it is very user friendly, very simple to understand. You don't have to use PowerShell scripts. You don't have to uh, uh, learn a new programming language altogether in order to use and understand Azure. So here you select the subscription, you select the resource group. So resource group, think of it as a logical grouping of all the resources, right? It can be a project name or department name. So it's a logical grouping into which you would like all the resources to be part of. Very helpful when you start billing. So if you want to know each department, what's the bill associated with that department's utilization, or the customer utilization, or the project utilization, then tags and resource group definitely help you. I'll give a virtual machine name. I'll say demo one. Oh, sorry, demo VM. Choose a region. So just because you have created a subscription from, let's say, from an Australian distributor or from an Australian partner, doesn't mean that you cannot create resource anywhere else in the world. I can select any region which is available within Azure and go ahead and create it. Again, the recommendation is always to create a resource closest to your region so that you're able to reduce the latency as much as possible. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and select Australia Southeast. And so I can say Australia Southeast. Availability options, so I can go ahead and distribute my virtual machine across two regions, across two data centers within the same region. So all those advanced high availability options are possible within Azure, right? So depending on the high availability option, your SLA also increases. So a single virtual machine SLA is 99.9. That's 3 nines. If you have two virtual machines of the same type, you either get 99.95 or 99.99. So these are three SLAs which are available within Microsoft. So as part of the demo, I'll say, no, I don't want to use any high availability. Next, I can select an image. As you can see, I have various images. If I click on see all images, I can see all the hundreds of images which are available from Microsoft Azure. Right, so all these images are available. I can click on see more and see more images if required. So for now, just to keep it simple, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and create a Windows-based virtual machine. So I'll say Windows Server 2016 Data Center Edition. Okay, I will choose a virtual machine. Now, these are the various sizes of a virtual machine, right? So there are different series. There's A series, B series, D series, E series. Now different series provide different capabilities. So there are certain virtual machines which are compute optimized, which is core optimized. There are some virtual machines which are storage optimized, which have disks with very high IOPS. So depending on the type of application that you'll end up running in the virtual machine, you have to select the right VM series. So in my scenario, I'll just choose a D4 SV3, which gives me a 4-core 16 GB. I can add up to 8 disks to it. The maximum disk IOPS, it shows a 6400. It also gives me a temporary disk or temporary storage of 32 GB. So I'll go ahead and click OK. Now the username is basically the local admin, right? So, I mean, the name can be anything. I can even have this as Roshan. So just give it a name, give it a strong password. Now, Azure also supports Spot instance. So a Spot instance is only and only recommended for testing and development. So if you create a Spot instance, Microsoft does have the ability to go ahead and shut down the virtual machine if there is more requirement for that particular type of virtual machine under pay-as-you-go or under CSP model, right? So I'll not go into too much details of Spot instance, but remember, Spot instances are one, very, very cheap, and second, they do not provide you any SLA. It is only recommended for testing and development. I can select what ports I want to allow for this virtual machine. So for now, I'll just enable RDP port. And this is where you can say whether your customer is using software assurance, right? If the customer is using software assurance, good. Or if your customer purchases Windows Server license from as part of CSP, then even then he can say tick yes over here, right? If not, you can click next. This is the OS disk. You have different types of disks again, HDD, SSD, premium SSD. Standard and premium, the difference is premium has higher IOPS, standard has lesser IOPS, right? I can even add additional data disks. So I can add up to 8 for this particular virtual machine. And each disk can grow, I think, up to 4 terabytes is what I checked last time. So you can add multiple disks as well. Networking. So it creates a virtual network here. As you see, it's given a name, it's defined a IP range. You can even create your own virtual network and your own IP range if required, right? So I can, as you see here, I can go ahead and change this to 192, for example, right? 1.16, I can create subnets for different application tiers and have different tiers used for different applications. So I'll say subnet 1. 1.0/24, and I can add subnet 1 as part of this virtual machine. It gives a public IP, NIC security option, so I can go ahead and provide security rules for my NIC card as well. So as you can see, it provides you very detailed configuration options. Under management, I can enable guest diagnostic, boot diagnostic. I can enable auto shutdown. Let's say if you don't want this virtual machine to run after a certain time, you can go ahead and shut down this virtual machine. You can also have a script that can automatically start this virtual machine as well. So even that is possible. So depending on your requirement, you can always go ahead and configure virtual machines to automatically start or stop. You can even enable it to take backup. So all these various options are available within Azure while creating the virtual machine. They can even add extensions. For example, if you want this virtual machine to by default have a monitoring agent or a backup agent, or if you want to run a script once the VM gets created, right? So all of those things are possible in extensions. Tags is very helpful, like I said earlier, for bifurcating or for identifying the resource and mapping the resource to a billing billing system, or not a billing system, but a billing entity. So let's say if you are creating resources for each project, each department, each user, tagging it with the right values will help you get get to know who's using it for what purposes, and then bill that customer or that user accordingly. So if I say review and create, I can go ahead and click create, and my virtual machine gets created. Like you see, in a matter of couple of minutes, I was able to select everything and go ahead and click on a new virtual, create a brand new virtual machine. That is how quick and simple is creation of a virtual machine in Azure. Once the virtual machine is created, this is where it shows. So right now I have one virtual machine running. Let me show that. So it has a public IP. It's part of a particular virtual network. It shows me the public IP. I can connect it using an RDP port, right? SSH or Bastion. I can restart. I can even capture. I can create an image out of this virtual machine, create a golden image, and reuse that image for deployment of multiple virtual machines. So all of those features and functionalities are possible within Microsoft Azure, right? So this was a very, very quick and a brief demo of infrastructure as a service. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat window. We have a question here. The question is, does Azure Files offer the same level of security and flexibility as AD if looking to move company data into cloud? So Guy, if your question is around whether Azure Files integrates with Azure AD for permission, answer is yes. We have a lot of partners who are moving customers' file server into Azure Files, uh, and any other data as well. So if you have if you have an application of a customer which needs shared location, right? Azure Files is the option, and yes, it integrates with Active Directory. There's another question from Alan saying, can you demo adding RMM agent using extension feature? Answer is yes. I mean, there are a lot of agents available by default within Azure. If the agent is not available, you can always add the agent manually as well, right? So Azure or Microsoft has worked with, let's say, vendors like Acronis. I think even ConnectWise probably has their RMM agent, Sophos, Checkpoint. So there's several vendors who have that RMM agent already in Azure, which you can use as part of the extension. So if you just click on the extension, it'll show you the list of agents that can be deployed as part of it. Okay, so keep your questions coming in. I'll be reviewing them as and when I jump onto the demonstration. So moving to the next slide. Just a second. Okay. So now that we have seen how we can create virtual machines, or we understood what is infrastructure as service, what are the benefits of it, and how Azure plays in that whole game, let's look at how do you identify infrastructure as service opportunities. And these are probably some of the top questions that I use when I have discussions with customers and see what of the customer can I map to Azure or Azure infrastructure as a service. So one of the first questions that we do is, do you use a secondary offset backup application? So backup is probably one of the largest softwares that any customer has, right? And they might be using any third-party software. Typically, it's recommended that you have at least 2 backup copies, right? So that in case the primary backup storage fails for whatever reason, you have a secondary backup available. Now, that's your secondary offset backup. So do you have that? That's the first question that I asked the customer. The next question is, do you use Microsoft 365 and do you have backup configured for it? Now, just because you use software as a service cloud or cloud model does not guarantee your data is uh, uh, not, I mean, your data is secure, right? So your data may get deleted accidentally by a user. If a user leaves a company and moves on to another company, he might archive the data, delete the data, or copy the data into his USB and move to another company. So you always still need to have a backup, even though you are running on Microsoft 365, right? So whether it is SharePoint or email protection, you still need to have a backup. End of the day, it is your data, company's data, right? So you still need to have a backup for it. So that's the second question I asked. The third is, do you currently use remote desktop? Australia is a market where a lot of customers use client server based application, right? Uh, Popular applications like Zero, Myop, the older versions are all client server based applications. I've come across other applications like Ostendo and other accounting softwares, which typically use client server, where there's a client installed uh, on the virtual desktop that accesses a SQL Server database to pull and push the data. So, do you use Windows remote desktop infrastructure? Are you currently running Windows Server 2008, 2008 R2, or SQL Server 2008 or 2008 R2? One of the reasons I ask this question is these servers and applications are out of support by Microsoft, right? So for whatever reason, if your customer is using this, it's important to identify that and also to educate them that, okay, if you want to continue to use it, there are limited options, and Azure is definitely one of them. So I'll talk about it in the next coming slides. But it's very important to identify whether the customer is actually using it, so that you can potentially identify an opportunity there. Do you use a web application that uses Active Directory for authentication? Right. So it can be anywhere. A web application can be used for anything. It can be their accounting software, their ERP, their billing software. So if it's a web application and if it integrates with Active Directory, it's a potential opportunity for you to move to infrastructure as service. Are you looking for a cost-effective disaster recovery solution? Most of the customers that I speak to don't have a disaster recovery, and it is very, very critical and important to have disaster recovery set up, especially during pandemic times. You do not want to be in a situation where your users are accessing the data remotely, and for whatever reason your servers goes down, right? You don't have anybody at the office to restart it, reinstall it, or reconfigure it. So it's very important that you're able to quickly fail over to another server and still continue to cater to your own end users and your end customers as well. And lastly, try identifying what type of the infrastructure they're using. Are they using physical server, virtual server? What's their infrastructure like? So these 6-7 questions will provide you a good baseline to then start converting those answers into potential infrastructure as a service opportunities, right? So in the next upcoming slides, I'll talk about how the answers for these questions can become opportunities for infrastructure as a service. Before I proceed, I see a couple of questions coming up. Will the session be recorded? Yes, the session will be recorded and the recording will be shared. Can we synchronize on-prem Active Directory to Azure AD? Answer is yes. You can definitely synchronize that. Most of the Office 365 or Microsoft 365 customers sync their on-prem AD to Azure AD. The other question is, we are moving off RDP for security reason. Where is the virtual firewall appliance feature? Alan, I'll try to squeeze in that quick demo towards the end of the session where I'll show you how you can have a virtual appliance deployed. So virtual appliance is another virtual machine in simple terms, right? So the virtual machine already has, let's say, a Linux operating system with Sophos configured on it. So towards the end of the session, I'll try to cover that quick demo as well. Okay. So let's look at how to build on the answers. So let's say your customer says, yes, I'm using StorageCraft to back up my 3 servers, 4 servers, my 20 laptops. Now, most of the popular backup softwares have an Azure connector. So these are some of them that I've come across so far, but if you have customers using any software apart from this, most of the popular backup softwares have an Azure connector. What does that mean is they can use the same software and store the backup of their application. It can be application, so it can be image backup, it can be desktop backup, user file backup. All of that can be stored into Azure. And the best part is there is not a huge integration effort, right? The connector is out of the box within the application itself, within the backup application, and you can just point it to Azure Storage, and it can backup and also restore, not just backup, it can also restore. So this is one of the most easiest ways to introduce Azure to your existing customers who are using one of the backup softwares. Now, the last image here, you see, this is the Azure backup itself. So if your customer is using a very old backup solution and is looking to either change or upgrade and is evaluating multiple backup offerings, then Azure also provides an Azure backup service, which you can use to back up virtual machine, disks, file shares, or even the entire server as well. So it is an enterprise grade backup service, which you can use to back up on-prem or systems which are already in cloud. Okay. Now the next is if your customer, going back, I quickly want to touch about AvePoint. So AvePoint is a solution that takes backup of your Office 365. So AvePoint, Veeam, Veritas, Netapp, Acronis, and even Cloudberry have connectors with Microsoft 365, and they can take backup of your Microsoft 365 and store it in Azure Storage. So you don't have to have an on-premise offline copy of your Office 365 data. So you don't need to worry about uploading and download speeds, especially when it comes to recovery. So you can use Azure Storage, backup into Azure Storage, and whenever you want to recover, you can quickly recover it from the Azure Storage as well. So talking about remote desktop, so Microsoft has introduced a brand new feature. I wouldn't say brand new, but it's a very fast-growing feature of Microsoft known as Windows Virtual Desktop. So Windows Virtual Desktop is your replacement of remote desktop services. So think of it as desktop as a service offering from Microsoft. So this desktop as a service offering runs on Windows 10, which means when an end user logs in into the virtual desktop, he's actually logging into Windows 10, and each user gets his or her own session. So it's one big fat server and multiple sessions created on that server. So similar to remote desktop, as you can see in the architecture here, the Windows Virtual Desktop still uses gateway server, load balancing, management, diagnostic, session broker. So all these are managed by Microsoft. So you don't have to deploy any of these roles, right? All you have to deploy is your terminal server or your session host, right? All you have to deploy is your terminal server, and Microsoft takes care of all other services of remote desktop. So the number of servers you deploy is also substantially reduced. Microsoft takes care of the hardware. They take care of the uptime of the virtual machine, the performance. So all of those things are taken care of by Microsoft, and you only worry about the image management piece, the security of your virtual desktop, and the terminal server itself. Right. So a very, very good solution to one upsell to a Microsoft 365 customer. So if he's already on Microsoft 365, you can always check with him, okay, are you using RDS? Are you using client server based application? If yes, let's see how Windows Virtual Desktop can potentially save you money and still give you a better performance. Migration to Azure. So let's say if you have customers who want to move their servers to Azure, right? Azure Migrate is a service which does everything that is required for you to migrate your on-premise servers to cloud. So it does discovery of your application. So it's an agent which you can deploy on your on-prem infrastructure, and it is able to identify which servers are compatible to move to cloud, which servers are ready to move to cloud. It does a quick assessment of what's the Azure estimate or what is the cost of Azure if you run this setup in Azure. And it also does the migration. It does the replication of your on-premise infrastructure to cloud. So it is one-stop shop for all your migration needs. It provides a reporting of how much replication is done, if it's failed, how to restart, what is failed, what you need to fix. So all the integrations are possible. You can use it to migrate servers, databases, remote desktop infrastructure to cloud. So all your IaaS features can be used, or all your IaaS components of your on-prem can be migrated to cloud using just one service. Last but not the least is Azure Sentinel. So Azure Sentinel is a very, very new feature. It's been available in the market, in the Australian market, I would say for the last 6 to 8 months now. And this is a very good upsell again to your existing Office 365, Microsoft 365 customers, right? So today, if you would like to know if there has been a cybersecurity incident within your customer premise or within your customer organization, you would only get to know about it if a customer raises a complaint with you or opens a support ticket. But what Azure Sentinel does is it is an intelligent piece of service which is able to read the logs of Office 365 and identify potential threats. So let me quickly run you through some snapshots. So these are the various data connectors that Sentinel has. As you can see, it can integrate with Azure AWS. It can integrate with your other firewalls. So you can push data from your firewall also into Azure Sentinel and provide or look for anomalies, threats, and insights about it. Now, once the data is within Azure, within Sentinel, you can use a lot of Azure work playbooks. So these are, think of it as scripts, which Microsoft has already written, which you can use to further go ahead and provide or look at troubleshooting. Where is the issue? What is it providing? What is the issue? Why is it causing that? You can also go ahead and look at the various incidents and prioritize it, right? So if you're a company who is looking at setting up your own security operations center, then Azure Sentinel is the perfect solution for you, right? This solution can get data across multiple Azure customers, across multiple Office 365 customers, and you're able to provide a proactive based remediation offering to your customers when it comes to cybersecurity. You can even automate the response, right? So as soon as there is an alert triggered, create a record, post a message in Teams, send an approval, and if it is true, block the user in Active Directory and block the IP in Palo Alto, right? And close the ticket in ServiceNow. So as you can see, you can create your own automated response, right? This is called as orchestration. So you can orchestrate a response automatically, and such type of logic apps that you create can become your own IP as well. This is something that is specific for you as a MSP, and you can use it across all your customers. And you can do incident management. As you see, it shows you an anonymous login to a particular server. Then using this server, he launched a couple of other IP addresses, right? And he was able to connect to these many different websites. This was the user who got compromised. Darcy, using her login, these are the other machines that it was able to log in. So this is a proper incident management service which is available within Azure Sentinel. And last but not the least, this is, I would say, the best selling feature of Azure Sentinel. It's called as hunting. So you can create your own queries, your own rules, and you can run it on a schedule and create a report and provide it to your customer. So this can be part of your managed services offering to your customer. You can go back to your customer and say that, okay, I have found 10 user anomalies in this month, and these are the activities that they're doing. Is this the right activity? Is this the activity that's expected to do? If not, then these are the remediation steps, and you can always say this is the cost for that remediation, right? So you can always be proactive. You can scan the network infrastructure from time to time, and this is one of the ways of you implementing a zero trust model, right? You always assume that you are under attack, and these are the queries that you can run to use it. What Microsoft has also done is they have taken it a step ahead and made it more simpler for Microsoft partners. So out of the box, there is integration with Office 365, right? And all the data that goes from Office 365 into Azure Sentinel, there is no charge associated with it. Azure Sentinel charges you based on the data ingestion, the amount of data you push into Sentinel. But any data of Azure AD and Microsoft 365 going into Sentinel is free of cost. And the best part is Microsoft has already written about 27 hunting rules. So these are some of the rules that I have made a note here. So for example, rare domain seen in cloud logs, right? So as soon as this alert is notified, you can open a support ticket, you can have a call with your customer saying, hey, this is a domain that I've seen your users using it. Is it the right? Is it a legitimate activity? Or PowerShell based mailbox login? Right. This is probably you don't see a lot of end customers using this, but all of a sudden, if you see this, then there is probably a hacker who's trying to attack the mailbox login, right? Or if you see external user added and removed within a short period of time, right? So why was this done, right? So uh, previously unseen bot or application added to team. So these are some of the rules and technology options that Microsoft has already created. All you need to do is just push the data into Sentinel, enable all these things, and just based on this, you can create your own rules and you can create your own report and start providing that to your customer. So that's about how you can upsell and cross-sell to your customers, identify infrastructure as service opportunities. Again, I'll be sharing the slides also, so you can share it with your other team members and use these simple things to identify more Azure opportunities and grow your revenue. Here are a couple of scenarios. So let's say if you have a customer of 30 users, each user using an average of 10 GB mailbox, then if you back up this about 300 GB of mailbox into Azure, then your Azure cost for that entire backup is just $12, right? $12 per month for that entire 30 user. So it is not at all expensive. Another scenario, let's say if you have a customer with 3 servers, each of the server has a half a terabyte of data, and you want to back up this to Azure, then the Azure cost per month is roughly about $50, right? So as you can see, you're storing 1.5 terabyte of data onto Azure, and the $50 also includes restore. So bandwidth cost is also included in this $50. Another scenario, let's say if you have a customer of 30 users using Windows RDS to provide virtual desktop, and if he wants to move to Azure, then his cost per user is roughly about $55 per user per month. The last scenario is if you have a customer who wants to move to cloud and is looking to do an initial discovery and assessment so that he is able to identify, are there any roadblocks? Is there something that he needs to change? Then use Azure Migrate service. This can do the discovery and assessment for free of cost, right? There's no charge associated with it. So if you are interested in any of these, do get in touch with Ingram Micro. So a quick summary to end the session. Microsoft Azure definitely gives rise to a lot of services revenue. So services revenue is where You can make more money and also improve your customer stickiness. Upsell a lot of Azure solutions to your existing base. A lot of you have already sold Microsoft 365, Office 365 to your customers, right? Use that customer base in order to go ahead and sell sell Azure. Look out for customers who are using client-server web-based applications that use Active Directory, right? Partners can make up to 18% on customers' Azure consumption. So there is a good services money you make. You also make a lot of money for customers who are just using Azure, right? So you also make money on when you have customers who start using Azure. You also make money on their consumption. Ingram Micro can provide you support in pre-sales and post-sales for any Azure activity. So if you have any customer requirement of Azure, or if you want us to tag along with you and identify opportunities, speak with your customers, we can always go hand in hand and help you with any pre-sales or post-sales. If you want us to want our help in setting up virtual desktop on Azure, we can definitely help you and support you with that. Well, that brings us to the end of today's session. We have slightly run over time, but if you do have any questions, please use the chat or the Q&A panel. There are a couple of questions that I see here. Let me quickly read it out. Can we migrate complete servers to Azure? The answer is yes. How does it affect OS license? So in Azure, the operating system license, you can either purchase the operating system license from Azure under pay as you go, or you can purchase the operating system license under CSP, under cloud solution provider model. If you do have any further questions to identify which is the right type of licensing model for your customer, Sean, just drop me an email. My email address is displayed on the slide right now, and we can have an offline discussion specific for your customer scenario and take it. But there are these two options. Typically, one of the options fits well for 99% of the cases. Another question, one of my SMB customer has NAS technology. It's using shared drive, using Azure. Which Azure service should I propose, Azure Files or Netapp? To answer your question, both Azure Files and Netapp does the job in your scenario. It depends on performance, it depends on price. So depending on these, because Azure Files has its own IOPS, Netapp Files comes with its own IOPS. Netapp Files, there's a minimum purchase requirement for it. I think the minimum purchase is, 4 terabytes or 1 terabyte. I'll need to double check that. So there are a couple of things that we'll need to check, but both the technology will definitely help your customer replace his NAS box. That's for sure. Okay, so those were the questions that I had. So thank you all for joining me in today's session. I hope the session was helpful and interactive. If you do have any further questions, please use my email address. Drop me an email with your requirement, and we can schedule a call, understand your requirement, and we'll be more than happy to help you win the opportunity. So that's it from my side, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time today, and have a great week ahead.